I'm delighted to welcome Professor Oliver Rackman, OBE, from Corpus Christi, Cambridge, to pick up on the first session looking at the past. Many things we've been talking about this morning relate to lessons that could have been learned, lessons that can be learned from the past, and we have none other than Professor Rackman to tell us all about that. Professor Rackman.
Thank you. Can we switch these lights off, please? There we go. Yep. Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be in great haste, so I won't waste time on preliminaries. One thing that I shall not be talking about is wildwood. That is to say, the original natural vegetation as it is supposed to have developed before the impact of, let's call it, settled humanity, before the coming of agriculture and keeping domestic animals, which reached this country about 6,000 years ago in the Neolithic. And I haven't time to go into the question of what wildwood looked like, or indeed whether it's already really existed. What I'm dealing with is, oops, is that? No. The various types of what I call tree land in historic times. And there are four main types. There is woodland, and by that I mean natural woods that have been managed but still retain their character as natural ecosystems. Oops, sorry. Getting to learn how this thing works. There is, oh, come on. There is, now why, oh yes, all right. There is wood pasture, that is to say the combination of trees and grazing animals, and of course the two are at odds with each other because the shade of the trees is bad for the pasture, and the animals will eat the regrowth of the trees. So you cut the trees not at ground level as in a wood, but about 10 feet above ground in order that they shall sprout, and the sprouts shall be out of reach of the animals. And then there is the matter of hedges and hedgerow trees and trees standing in fields. Whether this is, as in Midland England and much of the Bretland, the result of enclosure acts in the 18th and 19th centuries, or whether it's part of a process of gradual of stability and gradual alteration that goes back to the Middle Ages and probably to prehistoric times, as in most of Suffolk. So we're quite close here to the junction between these two types of landscape. And then the fourth type is plantations, which before this audience I needn't say much about, but the practice of treating trees as an arable crop. You put them there and you take them away. Now, I shall be talking mainly about the woodland tradition, and this is Haley wood, which is a classic example of the type, and on the left is the earliest historical record of Haley wood under that name, in a description of the Bishop of Ely's estates in 1251. Compared with the Google Earth image of Haley wood as it is now. Woodland history is derived partly from written records, but also from studies of what is there in the field. And written records, also maps. Maps appear maps at a usefully large scale appear in the late 16th century, and there is a comparison between a map of 1598 This is Chalkney Wood in Essex. Another historical document, a photograph of Chalkney Wood from the air, taken by the late Adolf Hitler in 1940, and Google Earth. And the point being that wood boundaries tend to be very stable. And I needn't, before this audience, enlarge much on the historic management of woods. The production of two products of timber, in the sense of what you make timber buildings, timber frame buildings out of, beams and planks, and underwood, the stuff that you burn on a wood fire. So that is a scene in the Bradfield Woods in the winter, and it's a scene that has been repeated on that spot at intervals of so many years since at least the 13th century. And you then go away. Can we shut half that door and let's make some of these images? Is that better? Yes. Yes, so this is in the Bradfield Woods. Most of the tree species will coppice. They sprout in various ways, either from the stump or from the roots. And sometimes I like to speculate on what trees did with the ability to do this before people invented axes. So that's getting on. That last picture was 3/4 of the way through the first year. This is 1.5 years' growth of predominantly ash coppice. And notice the large number of small timber trees, which are oaks. And this is lime underwood and also lime standard trees at 5 years' growth in a lime wood. And this is lime at 26 years' growth, by which time you would ordinarily think of, well, you would ordinarily have cut it at least once again. And of course we are familiar with the various underwood products, the specialised crafts like making hurdles and small wooden objects of various kinds. Something in coastal regions which we shouldn't overlook, and that is the use of underwood in sea defences, in securing low-lying coasts against rising relative sea level, as especially in Essex. But of course the main and regular product of woods was energy in the form of faggots or logs or charcoal. Again, there is much that could be said about this, and all of these have their international aspects. And for the timber component, well, for both timber and underwood, you can find actual examples in medieval buildings. So there is a medieval roof, which, like most medieval roofs, is built out of large numbers of small oak trees. Each timber, each of the rafters, for example, is the whole of a small and somewhat crooked oak tree. The object of woodland management, and this again is present in most cultures, to produce timbers that are small enough for 2 men to lift. You leave using the forest giants until you've invented power-driven tools. And so there is a timber frame structure with various types of underwood in the panels between the timbers in that partition. And yes, you see this at various social levels, and there is a rare survival of a humble house, the home of relatively poor people, made of small timber trees, mostly not oak, and large coppice poles. And among these, of course, you find ash coppice poles, complete with the breeding galleries of ash bark beetle. And an important an important point to notice is that by modern standards, most oak timber in medieval structures is of fencing grade quality. Where they did want high grade oak planks for fancy work like church screens and church doors, these were normally imported from what's now Poland and Lithuania. This sort of thing happens in various cultures all over the world, and a remarkable example, because it is quite recent, is the Eucalyptus coppice culture of Ethiopia. Eucalyptus globulus was introduced from Australia by the Ethiopian emperor in the late 19th century, and they now rely on it for a huge range of different things, from cooking fuel, eucalyptus leaves, to ordinary dwelling houses, and Ethiopian skyscrapers depend on eucalyptus for millions of scaffolding poles. This is how an economy works that isn't used to having saws or maintaining them. If you don't have saws, you're very dependent on coppice. Now, of course, not all woods are ancient, and the easiest way to create a new wood is to do nothing. You abandon a field, and I'm sure, again, I don't need to emphasize how this happens. It turns into a wood within a few decades, so that's about 8 years on. But notice that it will not be the same as the adjacent ancient wood. And this has happened all down the centuries, and there is a wood which, well, it's certainly an ancient wood, but it sits on medieval ridge and furrow, the archaeological traces of former cultivation. So it can't always have been a wood. And so how do you recognise ancient woods? Well, there are archaeological characteristics, such as the boundary banks that were made, we think, mainly in the late Anglo-Saxon period to protect woods against grazing animals getting in from outside. So they date from a period when woodland conservation was important and people were prepared to expend a lot of labour in maintaining it. And wood banks are an important piece of evidence in working out in ascertaining the history of woods, some of which have got bigger, leaving the wood bank behind in the interior, and some have got smaller, giving rise to a truncation boundary, which is a straight line, and straight lines are one of the clues that a feature is late, with a feeble token bank and a single row of hawthorns forming a hedge. So that is a 19th century truncation boundary of an ancient wood. And other characteristics of ancient woods: you cut down an ash tree and it will sprout, and if the sprouts don't get taken by cholera, it will sprout again, and you go on doing this, and in about 400 years it's something that looks like that, and in about 800 years it's something that looks like that. It's all one individual. And this is a characteristic of many species of tree, including lime, which grows in huge clonal rings that are potentially immortal, and we think a few of them go back to wildwood times. And then there are plants that are characteristic of ancient woods, like oxlip, and we are here in oxlip territory, and oxlip is present and used to be abundant in all the ancient woods, but is very reluctant to spread into a newly formed wood, even if it adjoins an existing wood. Oxlip and herb Paris. And yes, this is a grass that is a very strong indicator of ancient woodland. And what is the reason for this? Well, we don't know in detail, but there are two features that tend to be characteristic of ancient woodland plants. Either they are clonal, so they don't grow from seed very often, or they are ant dispersed, that ants carry the seed to new localities. And presumably those ants are reluctant to go across a field to start the plant in a new wood. And then there is the set of coppicing plants, the plants that are adapted to this cycle of felling and regrowth, and flower in great abundance in the year or the first or second year after the wood has been cut down, like oxlip or wood anemone, both of which are ancient woodland plants, though that's incidental, or violets. And this is there are many other animals that depend on coppicing plants in one way or another, such as the silver-washed fritillary, whose caterpillars feed on violets, and they need abundant violets. And then there are the summer-flowering coppicing plants, like angelica or marsh thistle. And there is the large guild, as American ecologists would call it, of the buried seed plants. And they tend to be different in different woods, like wood spurge in the Bradfield woods, or ragged robin and lesser spearwort as buried seed plants in Haley wood. And in Chalkney wood, it's red campion and wild raspberry, all of which you don't see them at all in the years before coppicing. But once the wood is cut down, back they come from seed that was produced at the last time round. Then I've said, I shan't say much about wood pasture, but an important feature of wood pasture is that this is the locality for most ancient trees. And in Suffolk we have, well, an internationally important wood pasture site, namely Staverton Park near Woodbridge, with its 4,000 ancient pollard oaks and all the creatures that live on or inside ancient trees. So that's Staverton Park, which is a medieval deer park. It was the place where the Earls of Norfolk kept their deer before they got promoted to be Dukes of Norfolk. And, but it's not the only site in Suffolk. This is a remarkable place called Risby Old Broom, not a few miles from here, again with huge ancient pollard oaks. And we are right on the edge of a notable wood pasture, the Ickworth Park. Now, this is not a medieval deer park. It was created by the Earls, as they then were, of Bristol in the early 18th century. And it includes many ancient trees that had different functions in the pre-park landscape. Like that great pollard oak, one of those that have names. That's the Tea Party oak, and it was preserved as a picturesque object in the 18th century park and is still there. Yes, now the veteran trees, of which ancient trees are a subset, are significant, not just as picturesque objects and archaeological, well, in effect, artifacts, but also because of the large number of creatures ranging from bats to hole-nesting birds to insects that live in specific parts of an ancient tree, to the lichens that live under overhangs where it doesn't rain and are on old fissured bark, all of which are creatures of ancient trees. So no amount of oak trees that are only 200 years old are any good for these creatures at all. Yes, so what of the recent history? Well, many of you will be old enough to remember what I used to call the years that the locusts have eaten. The time when ancient woods were regarded as merely vacant land that ought to look as though it was doing something useful. So many of them were grubbed out to form, well, mostly, of course, poor quality agricultural land. Some of them, well, were destroyed or attempted to be destroyed and replaced by plantations, often unsuccessful. And there are even, the fashion for replanting was so strong that even bodies, well, that ought to have known better and since have learnt better, indulged in it. So that was a feature of the third quarter of the 20th century. And, well, times moved on and people learnt better. That, I would say, is no longer a problem. But, well, indeed, I was told by my companion coming here that it's now got to the point where the destruction of only 13 hectares of an ancient wood is enough to set off a public inquiry. So, to that extent, woods are now better off than they have been for 100 years. But there are other enemies, and particularly the proliferation of deer. And this is what tends to happen when deer get into a wood. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. The way in which all the tree leaves abruptly stop at the height that a deer can reach. And many woodland plants, especially oxlip, tend to disappear. And what you're left with is inedible plants like dog's mercury. Or, if the browsing is very severe, what you're left with is just trees plus grass. But I was asked to say something about cholera, but I shan't, seeing that we've had such an excellent account already, I'm not going to dwell on this. That is, I've seen it in Estonia earlier this year. And so these are veteran ash trees attacked by that fungus. And on the right is the kind of witches' brooms that are so commonly appear in continental accounts of its effects. That the shoots are killed, and then the tree produces some more shoots, and it goes on doing this so as to form a small witch's broom. Now, what I shall end with is not so much about cholera, but a few remarks about tree diseases in general. Cholera may well have been here for a long time. Its earliest record in the Hymenacyphus, the cup fungus form, seems to be from Switzerland, where it has recently been discovered in Hymenacyphus herbarium specimens from the 1960s. At least it's Hymenacyphus specimens that contain the same DNA, we are told, as the DNA of the cup fungus stage of the present disease. So whether it's the same or not, I don't know, but apparently it has the same DNA. And one wonders whether, for example, the last time there was an epidemic of ash dieback with small witches' brooms, it was never properly investigated, and that was in the late 1970s when there was severe dieback of ash trees, particularly in hedges in the East Midlands. This cholera is part of a pattern. What I have done is to write a summary of my recent thoughts on the subject, which you should have been distributed to you, and this will replace any extended remarks that I might have made. But If we were in America, we might well be attending a similar conference regarding the ash trees of the state of Ohio. And now, ash is now the commonest tree in that state as a result of the subtraction of several other species by tree diseases brought from either Europe or Asia. So this leaves ash as the commonest remaining tree. And what we would be discussing there is what to do about the inexorable march of the emerald ash borer, an Asian insect which has got into Ohio through Canada. So this is part of a pattern. I could easily list 20 or 30 examples. A fundamental flaw in international trade. This is not something that's been happening down the centuries. It seems to have begun in the 19th century with more efficient sailing ships, and it has happened with increasing speed throughout the 20th century. The next thing that I ought to say is that tree pathologists are a critically endangered species. When I was a student, tree pathology was something that you learnt as an undergraduate. I now rather feel that I'm one of the last survivors of a species that's going extinct. My last thought would be, well, I'm delighted to see the government's show of interest in this matter, but don't put your trust in princes. That governments deal with affairs of state, and they have a very poor record in matters of land management. And they have a recent history of taking the best scientific advice and ignoring it. I won't quote examples. No names, no pack drill. Thank you.